Okay, so today I'm talking about the sun and moon and love. And in astrology, we call this synastry. So it's how to work with the sun and moon when we're comparing two nativities or the natal chart of two lovers. And we got to start here by just saying there's a responsibility to the public that astrologers have. This is from the ISAR Ethics Standards and Guidelines, to refrain from making slanderous comments about public figures and stick to things that are in the public domain. So I just want to say I'll be talking about some celebrity charts today. I will be trying to keep that very broad and just really sticking to the public domain. And most of it actually is not even, there won't be a lot of detail about the actual love lives. And the other thing I want to say is that a lot of the older texts that we use refer to man, woman, masculine, feminine. So there's gender terminology. I just want to acknowledge there is transgender people, just to give them a voice before I go in to maybe some gender language in some of the gender texts. Okay, hovering over the whole of this talk is Claudius Ptolemy, king of astrologers. He does talk about synastry actually, and in book 4, chapter 5 of the Tetrabiblos, he tells us that we need to look at the luminaries. This is what's the most important thing, and we have to see if the luminaries of one person are configured to the luminaries of the other person, and especially by trine or sextile. So he likes to see these easygoing, free-flowing aspects between luminaries in the charts of lovers. He also tells us to look specifically at the man's moon and the woman's sun, and that is what's important. I find this very interesting because Carl Jung has a notion of anima and animus, and this is the idea that in the unconscious of a man, there is an anima, which is like a feminine deity, and in a woman, there is the animus, or this masculine deity, or this masculine energy in her unconscious. Jung also acknowledged Ptolemy in his essay on synchronicity. He has this whole footnote. I talked about this in another talk where he says, look, Ptolemy tells us, look at the sun and the moon. And particularly this reversal of the moon, which is traditionally feminine in astrology, being important for the man, which might be understood as masculine, and then the reverse for the woman. So this kind of inversion or reversion of the gender assignments of the planet and the gender assignment of the nativity. This became very popular in the late 20th century amongst psychological practitioners and Jungian psychological practitioners, but there was many popular books about it. This is one called The Invisible Partners by John A. Sanford, published in 1980. But in it, he really likes this metaphor of a bridge to the unconscious. So here he says that the animus gives a bridge between a woman's consciousness and her unconscious inner world. When talking about men, he tells us that the anima serves as a bridge to the unconscious and the world of the man's soul. All right, the other thing I want to mention here, which is interesting, is that in the German language, die Sonne is feminine, and that's the word for the sun. And the moon, der Mond, is a masculine word. It has masculine gender. And so we see this even in the language, in the Germanic language, die Sonne und der Mond in Liebe. There's this linguistic inversion even in the German language. And so I find that very interesting, that this must be some kind of fundamental principle that goes beyond astrology, where the masculine and the feminine need to be inverted. And you think about the yin yang, where in the kernel or the center, the seed of something is its opposite. So I think that this synastry technique is really tapping into some transcendent principle of how masculinity and femininity are embedded in everything. And if someone becomes more of one, then the other actually becomes quite important. Ptolemy, again, book 1, chapter 16 of the Tetrabiblos, when he's talking about configurations or aspects, he tells us that the trine and sextile are harmonious because the signs are of the same sect. And he uses gendered terms, but we might say that so-called masculine signs are of the day sect. Those would be fire signs and air signs, and then so-called feminine signs would be of the night sect. And those would be water and earth signs. He tells us that harmony derives from the sect of the signs. And so when you share sect, you get this harmonious exchange. And so air signs make sextiles with fire signs and trine other air signs. Okay. The other thing about Ptolemy, this is in chapter 19 of book 1, he says that the opposition is square, even though they're more challenging, they're not in conjunct. And so oppositions and squares, because they share the same modality, are actually configured with each other. They exchange with each other in a very dynamic way, a hard and dynamic way. I want to just briefly talk about Richard Tarnas here. He's the modern academic astrologer who It has the excellent Cosmos and Psyche, the wonderful text on archetypical astrology. But in it, he really also focuses on what he calls critical, hard interactions between two planetary archetypes. And he says these are the quadrature aspects. That is to say that oppositions, squares, and conjunctions. He says that those hard aspects have a dynamic and critical interaction. And I found this to be true in synastry with the luminaries as well. The first chart I want to look at, Ryan O'Neill and Farrah Fawcett. Ryan's moon is co-present with Farrah's sun, so they both in Aquarius. And Farrah's moon sextiles Ryan's sun. Her moon's in Cancer, his sun is in Taurus. And so both of their luminaries, their opposite luminaries, actually have this really nice seeing or configuration. And you can see this is a really nice chart example because they had a 30-year love relationship. Just to pause here, the sun is the consciousness. It's the organ of mental perceptions, Eddie Fallon says. And the moon is the body. It's the home. It's the mother. And so when our consciousness or our mind can meet the body, I think there's this real nice balancing and interaction with the mind and the body, and that dynamic and that balancing can really serve a relationship well. All right, so next chart example, Ariana Grande and Mac Miller. They are known for this great love affair. Mac's moon is co-present with Ariana's sun, both in Cancer. Mac's sun squares Ariana's moon. His sun is in Capricorn, her moon's in Libra. But just notice in this chart, all of the luminaries are cardinal, and so they're all of this same mode. And so there's this dynamic, hard quadrature aspect, and that can really create this kind of sense of fatedness and a spark and an intensity. And it's also interesting because when you look at Ariana's relationship to Big Sean, which I think was before her relationship to Mac, Big Sean also has a Cancer moon, co-present with Ariana's Cancer sun. And his sun is closely opposite to her moon. But again, in this other relationship that was important to her, it was all cardinal luminaries. Ariana likes Cancer moons and cardinal suns. And that might be something that she can look out for. And you see it in her natal chart because Cancer moons and cardinal suns make this dynamic exchange with her own luminaries. This was a strange relationship with Pete Davidson. I think they were even engaged briefly. But Pete also has a cardinal moon. It was a Cap moon, so it opposed her Cancer sun rather than being co-present with it. And his sun doesn't see her moon. But the suns have this nice water trine. So there is some synergy with their luminaries. Okay, next relationship. I'm going to focus on Brad Pitt here. First up is Jennifer Aniston. Brad's moon is in conjunct both her moon and sun. And this relationship didn't last. They were married. It didn't last. But also, his sun and her moon make this close aspect in Sagittarius in the dynamic first house, his dynamic first house. And so you have his sun at 25 Sag, her moon at 23 Sag. So there is this exchange between opposing luminaries, between the sun and the moon. Now, it's not his moon, which Ptolemy says that it would be more important or would have been more important. And then their suns make this very close sextile. And so there is these sort of easy flowing and dynamism that you find in this chart. Next up is Brad and Angelina Jolie, and we can see here that Brad's moon is in conjunct to Angelina's sun. It's the same pattern as he had with Jen, so he's repeated this pattern. But his sun and her moon make a trine. And remember, Jen's moon and his sun were closely aspected, and he likes fire moons. Jen has a Sag moon, Angelina has an Aries moon. And then their suns make an opposition, so their suns are seeing each other, a dynamic opposition. Okay, lastly, Brad's relationship with Gwyneth Paltrow, which is actually first in chronological order here, but his moon makes the dynamic square to Gwyneth's sun, Gwyneth's Libra sun, and Brad's Capricorn moon. His sun and her moon make an opposition, so there's again that dynamic seeing. One of the conclusions we can say about Brad is that he likes masculine day-sect moons, so-called masculine moons, because that matches his sun. He's got this nice Sag sun. Next, I want to take a look at Chris Martin, who was Gwyneth Paltrow's husband. After her and Brad broke up, she married Chris Martin, had a long marriage and several kids. This is a really nice exchange here because his moon in Leo sextiles her sun in Libra. So, and it's the same degree, 4 degrees. So this is the quintessential Ptolemaic synastry aspect. If you look at Chris Martin's life after him and Gwyneth did that conscious separation, he has joined a relationship with Dakota Johnson, and again she's got a Libra sun. So he found another Libra sun, and you can see again these patterns repeat. His sun and her moon also make a dynamic square, and then they have this nice fire trine with their moons very close in degree, 1 degree off. Okay, so next relationship is Jenny Shimizu. She's a model, an actress, but she had a relationship with Angelina Jolie back in the 90s, and some really nice synastry, really on-point synastry. Their suns are both in Gemini. Angelina's moon makes a nice sextile to Jenny's sun. So their suns are co-present, the moons are closely opposed. It's all of the day sect. So there's some really nice matching here between these two. And I think I was reading that they were talking about marriage back in the 90s. So they had a really potent exchange, a luminary exchange. Next is Madonna, who was also in a relationship with Jenny Shimizu. And Jenny's moon makes a sextile to Madonna's Leo sun. So there it is, that sun-moon sextile. Jenny's sun and Madonna's moon make a dynamic square aspect. And you can conclude here that Jenny likes day sect suns because her Libra moon is of the day sect, and so she's had a pattern with other day sect suns to kind of have that nice luminary flow. There's more to synastry than just sun-moon aspects. All right, Venus-moon aspects can be very important. The shared mode of the angles is also quite important. For example, 2 cardinal risings experience the same dynamic transits together, so sometimes that can bring a relationship together and forge a closeness. Cartomancy pole. This is the Page of Hearts or the Jack of Hearts, and yeah, it's fitting here. Anytime we're talking about love, I want to see the water element appear. And the Page of Hearts is that idea that love is tenuous. Sometimes when we begin a relationship or meet someone new, there's that fluttering of the heart, and we don't really have confirmation how a relationship might go. And in fact, I think in every relationship, there's ultimately a kind of Jack of Hearts or Page of Hearts ambiguity, because you never know if a relationship will last. I mean, the nature of togetherness is separation. Everything comes to an end, and this, Pisces being a mutable sign, this card corresponding to Pisces, there's always this kind of change and shift that happens in relationships. Even ones that stay together for a long time, their dynamics change, people grow, people have different interests, they, change how they perceive each other, or they age, and there's difficulties with physical difficulties. So I think that there's a Piscean flow that's kind of encased in all relationships. That's how this card is speaking to me. All right, as always, you can book a donation-based reading with me, Astrology for All. I look forward to reading for you, sjanderson144.com. And Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Google Podcasts. You can find this audio in a lot of different places. And you can follow me on Twitter and Instagram at sjanderson144.